What if Seçkin Özdemir does not need a bigger project, but a completely different type of story? For years, discussions about his career have revolved around the same questions. Does he need a stronger platform? A bigger production? A more aggressive marketing strategy? A globally distributed series? But perhaps those questions miss something fundamental. Because even the right platform cannot save the wrong genre. And even an excellent performance can disappear if audiences encounter it inside a story that feels too familiar. This is where things become uncomfortable. Because throughout much of his career, Seçkin Özdemir built his identity through genres that once worked extremely well. Romantic dramas, emotional relationships, characters balancing vulnerability and restraint, stories designed to create emotional comfort. And for many years, those choices brought stability, visibility, recognition. They helped define who audiences believed he was. But genres do something powerful. They create expectations long before a character appears on screen. The moment people hear certain words, they already begin constructing assumptions. Romantic drama, family melodrama, psychological thriller, crime mystery. Without watching a single scene, audiences already anticipate how they will feel. And that is where the real challenge begins. Because recovery rarely happens through familiarity. It happens through disruption. The problem is not that romantic dramas stopped working. The problem is that they may work too well. They remind audiences of exactly what they already expect. The attractive protagonist, the emotionally controlled man, the recognizable emotional journey, the safe dramatic space. And this creates a dangerous situation. Not failure, predictability, because careers rarely become trapped by disasters. More often, they become trapped by repetition. The audience knows what they will receive. The industry knows what it will receive. And eventually, nobody feels surprised anymore. At first, this stability feels reassuring. There is work, there is visibility, there is continuity, but continuity and transformation are not the same thing. And this is where the real question emerges. If familiar genres reinforce existing perceptions, then what types of stories could actually create change? Interestingly, some of the strongest possibilities already align with qualities Seçkin Özdemir has demonstrated throughout his career. Just in a completely different context. Psychological thrillers. At first glance, this may seem unexpected. But psychological thrillers thrive on uncertainty. Characters who are difficult to understand. Emotional restraint hiding internal conflict. Controlled performances masking instability. Suddenly, characteristics that once supported romantic leads begin serving an entirely different purpose. The audience stops asking, will these two characters end up together? And starts asking, what is this character hiding? The emotional experience shifts completely. And so does audience perception. But things become even more interesting when another genre enters the conversation. Crime. Not traditional heroic crime stories, but darker noir narratives. Stories built around corruption, moral compromise, hidden motivations, characters navigating gray areas where right and wrong become increasingly difficult to separate. Because these stories allow something extremely valuable. Transformation without feeling forced. A detective carrying emotional scars. An investigator whose methods raise ethical questions. A political figure hiding dangerous secrets. A man trying to maintain control while everything around him slowly collapses. Suddenly, audiences encounter a familiar presence inside unfamiliar territory. And that contrast creates curiosity. But perhaps the most overlooked opportunity lies elsewhere. Drama itself. Not melodrama, character-driven drama. Because there is a crucial difference. Melodrama asks, what happens next? Character-driven drama asks, what happens inside this person? The first focuses on events. The second focuses on transformation, identity crises, emotional collapse, personal reinvention, internal consequences. And in an entertainment landscape increasingly drawn toward authenticity, these quieter but psychologically rich stories often create powerful audience connections. Especially in shorter formats, because modern audiences no longer require hundreds of episodes to become invested. Sometimes 6 episodes are enough, if the emotional truth feels real. But then we arrive at the boldest possibility of all. The genre that carries both the highest risk and potentially the greatest reward. Anti-hero narratives. Because anti-heroes operate differently from traditional protagonists. They are flawed, complicated, emotionally unpredictable, sometimes frustrating, sometimes unlikable, yet impossible to ignore. And audiences remember characters they cannot easily categorize. Because anti-heroes provoke discussion. They generate debate. They challenge expectations. Which raises a fascinating possibility. What if recovery does not require becoming more appealing? What if it requires becoming more interesting? Because those are not always the same thing. The challenge, however, extends beyond choosing one unconventional project. Many actors experiment once, then immediately return to familiar territory. And this often weakens the impact of transformation. Because audiences interpret experimentation as an exception rather than evolution. True reinvention requires consistency. The industry must begin associating the actor with new creative spaces. The audience must gradually understand that change is intentional, not temporary. Because identity shifts do not happen through isolated moments. They happen through repeated signals. One psychological thriller may surprise audiences. Several carefully chosen projects establish a new reality. And that distinction matters enormously. Because the goal is not simply to shock people. The goal is to reshape expectations. To create a moment when audiences stop saying, "This is exactly what I expected," and begin saying, "I didn't know he could do that." That sentence changes everything. Because surprise creates conversation. Conversation creates curiosity. And curiosity creates opportunity. Perhaps this is why the discussion around Seçkin Özdemir's future should move beyond questions of talent. Many fans already believe his talent has been proven. The more important question may be different. Can the stories themselves evolve? Can genre become a strategic tool rather than a comfortable habit? Because genres are never just entertainment categories. For actors seeking reinvention, they become career decisions. Traditional romantic dramas may continue offering stability. Conventional melodramas may continue offering familiarity. But psychological thrillers create mystery. Crime stories create moral complexity. Character-driven dramas create authenticity. Anti-hero narratives create transformation. And transformation is ultimately what recovery requires. Because careers rarely change when actors simply work more. They change when audiences see them differently. And sometimes, the fastest way to change perception is not through a new role. Not through a new platform. But through an entirely new type of story. Because genre is not simply about what audiences watch. It shapes what they expect. And expectations often determine what becomes possible next. Perhaps the future of Seçkin Özdemir's career will not depend on finding another version of what once worked. Perhaps it will depend on finding the courage to enter genres that demand something completely different. Because in entertainment, relevance rarely belongs to those who repeat familiar patterns. It belongs to those willing to surprise audiences before audiences even realize they want to be surprised.